Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In this video, we will read and understand Class 9 chapter Kathmandu by author Vikram Seth. It is an extract from his travel memoir, The Heaven Lake, in which he has written his experiences while he was returning from China via Tibet and Nepal to his hometown, New Delhi. Let's read about the chapter. Do you like traveling? The writer Vikram Seth enjoys it very much. In his book Heaven Lake, he describes a long journey from China to India via Tibet and Nepal. Have you heard of places like Ajmer Sharif, Madurai, Sanchi, Varanasi, Sarnath or Helbit? Can you name some other places like these? What do the surroundings of a holy place in your city look like? Think about it as you read Vikram Seth's description of Kathmandu. As I told you, it is travel memoir of Vikram Seth in which he has written about his experiences while he was returning to India from China via Tibet and Nepal. And in this chapter particularly, he wrote about his experience of two very famous religious places of Kathmandu. Let's read about it. I get a cheap room in the center of town and sleep for hours. The next morning, with Mr. Shah's son and nephew, I visit the two temples in Kathmandu that are most sacred to Hindus and Buddhists. Sacred means revered. They are pious temples. So Vikram Seth is writing his life experience. He says that he got a cheap room in the center of town in Kathmandu and he slept for hours. The next morning, he was to visit two holy places of Kathmandu along with Mr. Shah's son and nephew. Those holy places, one is sacred to Hindus and other to Buddhists. At Pashupatinath, outside which a sign proclaims entrance to Hindus only. Proclaims means made publicly known. There is an official sign outside Pashupatinath that entrance only for Hindus. The temple allows only the entrance of Hindus. Pashupatinath is a famous Hindu temple in Kathmandu. There is an atmosphere of febrile confusion. Febrile confusion means hurried activity. There is complete chaos. You can visualize it as you read because we see the same kind of situation outside any famous Hindu temples. Priests, hawkers, devotees, tourists, cows, monkeys, pigeons and dogs roam through the ground. So you can visualize this kind of situation when there is complete chaos, as there are people, tourists, devotees, priests, along with hawkers who are shouting for their stuff. There are animals only like cows, monkeys, pigeons, dog that roam around the ground. That was the situation outside the temple Pashupatinath. That is why the author is saying that there was febrile confusion. We offer a few flowers. There are so many worshippers that some people trying to get the priest's attention are elbowed aside by others pushing their way to the front. So there was so much of rush. The author offered flowers and then he saw that there was so much rush that some worshippers, some people who were trying to get the priest's attention, they were elbowed down. They were elbowed aside. They were pushed aside because of elbows of others who were making their way to the front. A princess of Nepalese royal house appears. Everyone bows and makes way. He also saw a princess from Nepalese royal house who comes there and everybody bows in front of her and make way for her. By the main gate, a party of saffron-clad Westerners struggle for permission to enter. The policeman is not convinced that they are Hindus. Only Hindus are allowed to enter. At the main gate, there are some saffron-clad Westerners. That means they are wearing saffron dress. And the policeman is not convinced that they are Hindus. He is not allowing them to get inside, although they are struggling. Because only Hindus are allowed to enter in the temple. The author also saws a fight between two monkeys. One chases the other. That means one is running after the other, who then jumps onto a shivling, then run around screaming and shouting the temples. He goes down the river Holy Bhagmati, that flows below. So Holy Bhagmati river flows below. A corpse is being cremated. Corpse is dead body. Cremated is performing the last rites, and in Hindus it is by burning the dead body. So a corpse is being burned on the banks. Washerwomen are at their work and children bath. Washerwomen, they are washing their clothes there and children are also bathing in the same river. From a balcony, a basket of flowers and leaves, old offerings now wilted. Wilted means drooped, lifeless, withered, is dropped into the river. So from balcony, someone is also throwing a basket of flowers which are now lifeless and dried. A small shrine, half protrude. Shrine is a place of worship. Protrude means extended beyond and above the surface. There is a small shrine which has half come out from the stone platform on the river bank. When it emerges fully, the goddess inside will escape and the evil period of Kali Yuga will end on earth. And it is believed that the shrine, which is now half coming out, when it comes out fully, the goddess who is inside the shrine will escape. And the period of Kali Yuga, which is considered to be evil, which is considered to be a period of pain and suffering, will end on earth. At the Bodhinath Stupa, the Buddhist shrine of Kathmandu, there is in contrast a sense of stillness. Contrary to Pashupatinath, the Hindu temple, outside the Bodhinath Stupa, which is Buddhist shrine, there is completely different situation. It is completely in contrast with the previous temple. There is stillness, there is quietness. Its immense white dome is ringed by a road. Ringed means surrounded. So the white dome of the temple is surrounded by road. Small shops stand on its outer edge. Many of these are owned by Tibetan immigrants. Immigrants are people who come to live in foreign country permanently. So there are many shops on the edge of the shrine, and these shops are mostly owned by Tibetan immigrants. Felt bags, Tibetan prints and silver jewelry can be brought here. So many Tibetan things like bags, prints and jewelry can be bought from here. There are no crowds. This is a heaven of quietness in the busy streets around. Heaven means a safe place. So there is no crowd around this stupa, and it is a safe place of quietness as compared to the busy streets in Kathmandu. Kathmandu is vivid, mercenary, religious, with small shrines to flower-adorned deities along the narrowest and busiest street. Vivid is full of life and colorful. Mercenary is money-oriented. So the author says that Kathmandu is vivid, it is money-oriented, it is religious, with many shrines in which you will find deities, that means gods and goddesses, who are decorated with flower. Along the busiest street of Kathmandu, there are fruit sellers, flute sellers, hawkers of postcards. There are shops selling Western cosmetics, film rolls, chocolates, or copper utensils, Nepalese antiques. Antiques are old and expensive items. You will also hear film song blare out from the radios, playing out loudly from the radios. Cars, horn sound, bicycles, bells ring. Stray cows look questioningly at motorcycles. That means you will hear all these sounds of radios, cars, bicycles, even stray cows. They are also mowing, and they are also as if questioningly looking at motorcyclists. Vendors shout out their wares. Their wares means their stuff. Vendors are also shouting to sell their stuff. I indulge myself mindlessly by a bar of marzipan. Marzipan is a sweet which is made with grated almond. So the author says that he indulged himself mindlessly. That means without thinking much, he tries to eat something, which is a bar of marzipan, a corn on the cob roasted in a charcoal brazier. Brazier is open stove on the pavement. He also eats a corn which is roasted on open stove, rubbed with salt, chili powder and lemon. I'm sure you must also have eaten that kind of corn, which we also call bhutta. A couple of love story comics and even a Reader's Digest. He also buys some comics and Reader's Digest. It is a magazine kind of book. All this I washed down with Coca-Cola and a nauseating. Nauseating means sickening, not very good. Orange drink and feel much better for it. So he eats all those things and drinks a sickening orange drink. I consider what route I should take back home if I were propelled by enthusiasm for travel per se. Per se, propelled is to drive or pushed. Per se means by itself. I would go by bus and train to Patna and then sail up the Ganges past Banaras to Allahabad. Then up the Yamuna past Agra to Delhi. But I am too exhausted and homesick. The author says that if he is propelled, that means if he is really enthusiastic for travel by itself, then he would take a long route. That means he would take a bus and go to Patna, and then he would go through river from Ganges. He would pass Banaras and Allahabad, and then he will take the route of Yamuna. He will pass Agra and Delhi. But he was very tired. He was exhausted and he was homesick, and that was the last day of August, and his inner self was telling him to go home. I enter a Nepal Airlines office and buy a ticket for tomorrow's flight. So the author just goes to a Nepal Airlines office and buys a ticket for the next day's flight. I look at the flute seller standing in a corner of the square near the hotel. Now the author looks at a flute seller who was standing at the corner of a square. Square means the square area near the hotel where the author was staying. In his hand is a pole with an attachment at the top from which 50 or 60 basuris protrude in all directions like the quills of a porcupine. In his hand, in the flute seller's hand, there is a long pole with an attachment on the top in which there are around 50 to 60 basuris, that means flutes, protrude in all direction. The flutes are coming out in all direction like the quills of porcupine. Quills means hair. Porcupine, as you can see in the picture, is an animal who has hair on his body coming out in all direction. They are of bamboo. There are cross flutes and recorders. So the flutes are of bamboo and there are different kind of flutes and recorders. From time to time, he stands the pole on ground, selects a flute and plays for a few minutes. Time to time, he just keeps the pole on the ground, he selects a flute and he plays tune on the flute for a few minutes. The sound rises clearly above the noise of traffic and the hawkers' cries. The sound of the flute, it rises clearly above the noise of traffic and hawkers that are those who are shouting. So the sound of flute it rises above the sound of traffic and hawkers. Plays slowly, meditatively, without excessive display. Meditatively means thoughtfully. The flute seller plays his flute slowly, thoughtfully, and does not show off. He does not shout out his wares. Occasionally, he makes a sale, but in a curiously offhand way, as if this were incidental to his enterprise. Offhand means casual, not showing much interest. So he does not shout to sell his flutes. Occasionally he makes a sell. Occasionally somebody comes and buys his flute. But it is such a casual as if he is not at all interested. And this is just incidental. That means this is bound to happen. Sometimes he breaks off playing to talk to the fruit seller. I imagine that this has been the pattern of his life for years. Sometimes he stops playing his flute and talks to the fruit seller. And the author, he imagined that this has been the way of his life for years. This is how he has spent his life for years. I find it difficult to tear myself away from the square. The author who is so captivated by the tune of flute that he finds it difficult to go away from that particular area, the square. Flute music always does this to me. It is at once the most universal and the most particular sounds. Flute music does this thing to the author. He is so captivated, so attracted by the music that it becomes difficult for him to part from the music. It is at once, according to the author, it is the most universal and most particular sound. That means it is something which is common in all cultures. It is found everywhere. There is no culture that does not have its flute. So in every culture, there is a flute. The reedne, it's a kind of flute. The recorder, the Japanese shakuhachi, the deep bansuri of Hindustani classical music, the clear or breedy flutes of South America, the high-pitched Chinese flute. So every culture, the name may be different, but every culture has its own flute. Each has its specific fingering. Fingering is the way of placing the fingers to play different notes. So in each culture, there is a flute and each culture has a different way of fingering. And compass. Compass is the range of music. The range of music may be different. The way of playing, that means fingering, may be different. But each culture has its own flute. It weaves its own association. Yet to hear any flute is, it seems to me, to be drawn into the commonality of all mankind, to be moved by music, closest in its phrases and sentences to the human voice. According to the author, hearing the flute is very much common. It is very much common to the mankind. It is a kind of music which is very much common to human voice. Its motive force too is living breath. It too needs to pause and breathe before it can go. So like a human has to stop, take pauses in between talking. Similarly, in playing a music also, one has to stop, one has to breathe, one has to take pauses. So it is similar as a human speaking. Flute is very common to it is very universal to humankind. It is common in all the culture, and it is very common to human voice. It is played in the same way as a human speaks or sings. That I can be so affected by a few familiar phrases on the bansuri surprises me at first, for on the previous occasions that I have returned home after a long absence abroad, I have hardly noticed such details and certainly have not invested them with the significance I do now. Now, at last, the author says that he can be so affected by the familiar notes of bansuri, the flute, it surprises the author. For in the previous occasions also, he had gone outside, he had returned home after a long absence, he had roamed abroad. After long absence, he has returned home, but he had never noticed in such details that he can be so invested, so affected by something, and it has become so significant to him now. It has become so important to him that he has been affected by the musics. It has such effect on him which he has never understood before in his travel, or he had never paid attention to. So this is how Vikram Seth has described his visit to Kathmandu. In his memoir, The Heaven Lake, he has described his visit to various places in Tibet and in Nepal where he had met with locals there. He had tried to understand their way of living. It's very interesting book. You can read it if you want to. So this was about the chapter. Here we'll stop. I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye. Take care.